we're now recording. And Tom, welcome to our program. It's good to see you, and hope you guys get back to Tucson real soon.
Yeah, we do too. We're trying to get
at this time. At this time, I'm going to see if share the screen.
Provided by ASARCO Incorporated, an integrated producer of non-ferrous metals and other industrial minerals and products. ASARCO Incorporated, adding value to nature's resources.
The cast and characters of the Sonora Desert are really derived from an older drama. That's the great tropical forest show that once covered most of the globe. To get a better look at these beginnings, we've traveled down to the southern end of the Mexican state of Sonora, near the historical town of Álamos. Here, an unusual forest combines cactus with deciduous trees and long dry spells with real wet ones. Geographically, we're in an in-between place, not far enough south that we're running out of typical Sonora Desert, but not so far as to be typically tropical. And we're at kind of an in-between elevation too, a few thousand feet.
This is a crossover zone, and many species reach their most northern limits here or their most southern limits. So therefore, the diversity here is just incredible. This is true for plants, animals, birds, and insects, really for all life here. The change is within a 30-mile area of where we live here, up from the Sonora Desert thorn scrub into the tropical deciduous forest. We have a greater accumulation of rainfall here, approximately twice the average of what the Sonoran Desert receives a year. The monsoons, very much like the Sonoran Desert, but the monsoons here just come in the afternoon. In the mornings, we have beautiful blue skies, and in the afternoon, these huge storms build up. And you can see them coming in from miles away. And they come in and they just deluge with rain in the afternoons. It's just magnificent. And the activity change is beyond belief when things wake up in the summer. Just beyond belief. The animals, the frogs, the toads are so abundant, you have to watch where you walk. The highest trees are 20 meters is a high tree. But this really is a short tree forest with an open canopy. And when it leaves out, it becomes a dense canopy. So under it, the shrubs are medium height, and our understory is abundant, but mostly in the rainy season. A great many forbs and small vascular plants are ground covers from a millimeter high all the way to 12 inches high. But as you walk through the forest, it's a constant carpet of green underneath the heavy canopy. And most of these plants couldn't handle it very well in the open, hot, tropical season of the winter, because there is an awful lot of sun in the winter. Fig trees and the arroyos occur in the arroyos usually. We have approximately 5 species of figs in the immediate area. They're huge trees, some of our biggest, if not our biggest canopy tree. And as the birds migrate through, it's probably one of the greatest security blankets that they have. It provides a big canopy for them. Well, the legumes are very interesting. We have an enormous amount of legume species, and they are the greater percentage of our species here in the way of trees. The barks and the form of the different legumes is just a constant source of fascination. The genus Bersera is a succulent tree that occurs
Errol, we lost the sound.
Yes, no sound.
This tree behind
Can
us,
you now hear it?
Yeah.
Grandifol,
Okay.
and it's identified by the red exfoliating bark on metallic green. Color combinations I see like metallic red over silver, silvery blue, or just plain powdery white, and various combinations of metallic colors like that. They're really quite beautiful and amazing.
It's hardly applicable to use seasonal here. Approximately every 6 to 8 weeks, there's a major change in the animals, birds, and the plant life. As far as rain goes, we have a gentle winter rains that bring on the blooming of the trees in the spring, in the early part of the year. And we have the heavy summer rains, monsoons, which give us a very lush canopy and extremely heavy foliage.
More water translates into more greenery. So you run into wetter, greener versions of everything, including reptiles suited to living above the ground. Howard, it's almost like a jungle in here. What kind of animals can we expect to find?
Well, here we actually find quite a few species that are coming up from the tropics, reaching the northern limits of their ranges. And they're generally species that are frost sensitive, can't endure freezing winters, and require considerably more moisture, at least through the summer and winter seasons, than do most of the Sonoran Desert animals.
I expect with all these trees, we can find animals living up there, can't we?
There are quite a few that are adapted to living in trees and shrubs and so on environment. The vine snake, for example,
We're good.
is marvelous
Thank
for climbing, has a long, slender body form, color that looks very much like a vine, and has a pointed head, which blends very effectively with the vegetation. There's another arboreal snake that kind of partitions this arboreal niche somewhat with the vine snake. It's called the blunt-headed snake, and it's even more thinly constructed, very light in build, has a disproportionately large head, but because it's so much thinner than the vine snake, it can work the outer limbs of the trees and shrubs, those which would be too frail to support the weight of the vine snake. So in this way, they're both able to exploit the same general habitat type, but utilizing different niches. Two very interesting tree frogs reached their northern limits here in southern Sonora also. We have the Mexican tree frog, which is a tropical species, goes all the way down into Central America, and comes up, pretty much follows the tropical deciduous forest habitat up into Sonora. Perhaps even more interesting is the Mexican leaf frog. Before they lay their eggs, the females go down to the water and sit in the shallow water and take up water through their skin and through their cloaca, which then they transport up to the leaves, and this aids in the deposition of the eggs. It moistens them and keeps them from getting too dry as they deposit it. Unlike most other tree frogs, which tend to hop and are rather active in their movement, the Mexican leaf frog moves very deliberate steps as they find their way through the vegetation. In fact, they move in a manner very similar to that we associate with chameleons in Africa. They reach out, grasp a limb, and then reach up with the other forelimb and move very slowly and deliberately, and finally take up a station in the shrubs or low-growing trees.
The term dry deciduous tropical forest might sound at first like a contradiction, until you realize, of course, it's not wet and dry at the same time. It's wet or dry by turns. And when it's wet, It's much wetter than the Sonora Desert to the north.
When the rainy season begins, usually in late June or early July, because it's already very hot, things respond quickly. And the cacti virtually disappear under the canopy of foliage. And the animals come active again, more active than they were before. And really, it's the beginning of the life cycle for most animals and plants in this area. I have a particular interest in this region because the origin of the Sonoran Desert is to be found here in the tropical deciduous forest. Both areas have great similarities, which are apparent if you start looking at the vegetation a little more closely. Almost all of the perennial plants that are found in the Sonoran Desert have their closest relatives in this region here. Both areas have a number of the same species, such as organ pipe cactus, palo verde trees, coral beans, elephant trees, and several others. And most of the other perennials have very close relatives here, although there are more species here than there are in the Sonoran Desert. During the dry season in the deciduous tropical forest, the humidity still tends to be a bit higher. So the drought is not as severe and the summer rainy season is considerably heavier. So you have much thicker vegetation here and a greater diversity of species, partly because of the higher rainfall and partly, probably more importantly, because frost is much more rare. If you were to characterize the Sonoran Desert, for instance, the simplest definition would be that it's a desert area that's characterized by seasonal drought with primarily a summer rainy season, and the vegetation is dominated by legume trees and columnar cacti. And to describe here the deciduous tropical forest is pretty much the same. It's a semi-arid area, not an arid area, a semi-arid area with primarily a summer rainfall, and the dominant vegetation is legume trees and columnar cacti. The main difference is the rain is greater here, there's less frost, and the number of types of plants is much greater here. The growth forms of the plants may be different in two places. So things that are trees here may be shrubs in Arizona, but they're nonetheless the same species in many cases. Because of the density of vegetation here, there is competition for sunlight. So as a consequence, you'll notice that some of the adaptive strategies used here are that most of the trees and cacti, for that matter, are tall and narrow. They're reaching for the sunlight before they get overshadowed by the tree next to them or the cactus next to them. The growth occurs only during the rainy season. So that's the time when they're struggling for light as well. When they're leafless, there's almost no photosynthesis taking place. But during the summer rainy season, everything is leafed out and it's nearly a solid canopy of leaves. So the ones that grow the best are the ones that are in the sunlight. That's a fairly narrow crown because there are trees on both sides of any given tree in most cases. So the growth is upright, very, very upright. There aren't very many tall, broad trees here. One of the major contrasts that you can see here, and the reason you can tell that it's not, in fact, a tropical rainforest, is that during the dry season, one of the prominent green things is the cacti. The columnar cacti, which are quite tall, 20 feet, although they're somewhat shorter than the trees in most cases. But 9 months a year, most of the trees are leafless. So even though the trees are very dense, there's still plenty of sunlight most of the year for the cacti to do their photosynthesis. But during the 3 months or so of rainy season, the cacti are almost completely overshadowed by leafy trees. They can survive here because most of the year they do, in fact, have plenty of sunlight.
It's this mix of dry and wet, open and leafy, which draws such a wide cast of characters. There doesn't seem to be one of anything here, except maybe poisonous lizards. We've talked about snakes in the trees. How about snakes on the ground?
Well, there are quite a few. We have tropical snakes that occur here, going further south, that are principally terrestrial or fossorial, meaning they burrow into the ground in some way. We have some, like the saddle leaf nose snake, which has a broad scale across the front of its nose, and that works something on the order of a bulldozer as it plows through soft earth, burrowing into the ground, opening up old abandoned burrows. The Sinaloan longnose snake, closely related to our Sonoran Desert longnose snakes or Western longnose snakes. They get their name because they have a rather pointed nose, which serves essentially the same function, but in a different way. It operates more like a plow.
How do some of these tropical lizards compare in size to the desert type?
Well, one large species we find here in southern Sonora is the spiny-tailed iguana. They grow to about 30 inches in length, have a very rough spiny tail, which they use very effectively in defense against predators. They lash the tail and make themselves very unpleasant. Of course, they have a strong bite as well. But we often see them in rocky habitats, rocky protrusions within the thorn forest. But they also climb trees quite well. And when we see the adults, we see an animal that blends more with the tree trunks and limbs and rocks than they do with the foliage. But when these guys hatch out in the rainy season, they're bright green, very beautiful emerald green. This green color, while the tropical forest is verdant as it is during the summer rainy season, gives them an edge for survival. Now, another large lizard found in southern Sonora, reaching the northern limits of its range throughout Mexico and on down into Guatemala, is the beaded lizard, the nearest living relative of the Gila monster lizard, which has come to characterize the Sonoran Desert. Very closely related species, but the beaded lizard grows to a larger size, up to about 3 feet in length, and is considerably more arboreal than the Gila monster. The Gila monster will actually climb up into low-growing shrubbery in the Sonoran Desert, but the beaded lizard is known to get up 12, 15 feet or more in these dry forest trees. We think that probably the beaded lizard is a species that has originated in the dry tropical forests pretty much as they exist today. And that's because their distribution very closely follows the dry forests as we now know them. These lizards are of great interest throughout the world because they're the only living venomous lizards. And this has caused some problems for them because they're in such great demand. In some areas, they have been extensively collected, and laws in both the United States and Mexico now protect both of these species from commercial exploitation.
Is that the primary threat to those animals?
Well, in reality, maintaining the habitat that they require, this habitat we're in right now, in fact, is the most critical need for not only the beaded lizard, but all the other species that occur here. Maintaining this rich biological diversity is very important, and I think that it can be done while meeting the human needs as well.
Huge granite formations with embedded silver were submerged in the Álamos area over 40 million years ago. And though they were later covered even deeper by lava and cinders and ash, they didn't stay buried. The next 35 million years or so of erosion and massive faulting also created the Baja Peninsula. With all the familiar looking creatures and plants here, the little patch of ocean near the Sonoran Desert may be the only thing in the picture that's unfamiliar. More than living things look familiar here. This terrain evolved very much the same way as did our desert to the north, with great volcanoes and stretching of the earth. And eventually up to the surface came a lot of silver.
What happened?
I think Errol's bandwidth is slow and it
Oh,
stopped,
okay.
but
We're just getting to the super interesting part. I can't wait not to meet those snakes.
Oh, she likes snakes, huh?
No, she said to not meet him. I don't know.
Hope we could hear.
Ellen Price, can you call Errol?
Okay.
We've had all kinds of bandwidth issues this week with the Fout. They come and they hijack our connections, and I had trouble with Netflix and other stuff.
Hi, Carolyn, tell Errol that the video stopped.
Okay, he knows. He's trying to get it back up again.
Okie dokie.
I think it's back up again.
Okay,
You might have to rejoin. I don't know, but it's back up.
okay.
Can you see it?
No,
It's not on yet. Okay, I can hear it on his, but he's working on it.
okay, thanks.
Okay, all right. Bye.
Well, he's working on it.
Put another quarter in.
Stephanie, can you hear us now? Can we hear you?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
good. Yes, good.
I put it on mobile hotspot. I had no internet,
Oh,
so it'll last a while, maybe. We'll see.
Interesting to see you, Stephanie, all those years ago. Can you imagine?
I didn't know I was that slim. I always thought I was fat. I look much younger, yeah. Yeah.
But we all grew in our maturity and wisdom, right?
Nice to see.
Yeah.
It's nice to see everybody. I got it on my phone, but I have an internet problem. I don't send calls.
Stephanie, did you know the other people from the university and the Desert Museum? Did you know them?
Oh, they were some of my closest friends. Oh, yeah. Oh, they're my closest friends. Several of them have passed away. Errol Lawler, the herper, he's gone. And there's just Mark Dimmitt and myself, Mark who came on that show. Yeah. Oh, yes. No, they were very close friends. Yeah. And still are. I mean, we hate to admit we've known each other 45 years. Yeah.
Do they still come down? Sorry, Pam, I'm sorry.
Those who come down.
well, Stephanie has told me in the past that there was a lot of traffic between the scientists in Arizona and Alamos.
Right, and we just have nobody now. And I had the first in the 90s all the way up to, the late 90s. I mean, my journals are just full of, there's always somebody here all seasons of the year in the different disciplines. And part of what slowed things down was the violence.
Earl, we can see you now.
Huge granite formations with embedded were submerged in the Alamos area over 40 years ago. And though they were later covered even deeper by lava and cinders and ash, they stay buried. The next 5 billion years or so, erosion and massive faulting also created the Baja Peninsula. With all the familiar looking creatures and plants here, the little patch of ocean near the Sonora Desert may be the only thing in the picture that's unfamiliar. More than living things look familiar here. This terrain evolved very much the same way as in our desert to the north, with great volcanoes and stretching of the earth. And eventually up to the surface came a lot of silver. So we have a colorful human history here. Thanks to the early Mexican miners, Spain managed to supply most of the world's silver for a few hundred years. Town of Álamos, and still got it, only a look to it.
La vida era más sedentaria en aquella época.
Life back then was much more sedentary. There were people here from all over the world. Chinese, Japanese, German, and of course Spaniards, and one or two English, not a lot.
Cuando yo era
When I there weren't any fences. We knew where everybody's land started and ended.
muchos pájaros,
There were many birds, many snakes, lots of coyotes, wild cats, and mountain lions. There used to be great quantities of just about everything there in the jungle and mountains.
¿cierto? Y como fue la vegetación,
There was so much vegetation.
no se daba abasto,
We thought there would always be enough.
mucha,
Lots of trees, so many trees, lots of wild fruit. Many people live off all this fruit, eating and selling them.
Things often look sweeter in the rearview mirror, more colorful, more plentiful. But at least as far as birds go, this forest is still very colorful.
In the deciduous forest in southern Sonora, there are probably 100, 150 species, of which about 40 are really characteristic of that habitat. About half a dozen of those species come on into Arizona. They follow the riparian corridors north, so they're found in extreme southern Arizona, just in the riparian areas. The greyhawk is an example of a bird that's really quite common in the deciduous forest and is rather unusual to rare in the southern part of Arizona. Parrots, along with many of the other species that are characteristic of this deciduous forest, are primed and ready to nest when the rains begin in June or July. And almost instantly after the rains begin, they're building nests, laying their eggs, then the young are being fed and fledged, leave the nest at a time when there are lots of insects and other food items for them to feed upon. The crested paracara is a kind of hawk. It's a raptor. It extends all over Mexico, even further south, and just barely gets into the United States in southern Arizona. The black-throated magpie jay is one of the most characteristic birds of the deciduous forest. It's a social species, and usually one sees 6 or 8 individuals at a time. Some of the individuals are immature birds that are remaining with their parents and may actually help in the rearing of young of their parents. What we see in the birds of the deciduous forest in Sonora is the northern extension of a very large group of species, which range all the way from the southern part of Central America to southern Sonora. And in southern Sonora, there are about 40 species of birds, which we do not find in the United States. So the area is of great interest because it represents a dividing line between the tropics and the temperate areas in North America.
Finally, this in-between place has one more population as various as conventioneers. The cats of the deciduous tropical forest are made up of far-ranging northerners and southerners.
Mountain lions or pumas are found all over North America, Central America, and South America. And almost any place you find deer, whatever kind or size or shape, you'll find mountain lions, as long as there are a bit of wilderness around too. There are a number of small cats you could find in the dry tropical forest of southern Sonora. One in particular would be the ocelot. It's probably the most abundant small cat of that area. But there are others. There are margays, which are kind of a smaller version of the ocelot and a little more arboreal. There's a jaguarundi, which is a very different small cat, very dark in color, different behavior, looks like a almost like a cat-like weasel. The bobcat begins to fade out. The bobcat's found over much of the North America, begins to disappear, and it's replaced by these more tropical cats. Future of these variety of cats we talked about depends almost entirely on the future of that habitat, whether it's preserved, whether it's how it's preserved, whether it's preserved in little bits here and there, or broad, big continuous forests. But as that goes, so will these animals, just through changes through the food chain and the ecosystem.
As you follow the lineage of our desert dwellers back towards the tropics, things begin to spread. There are more and more variations as you get farther south. And the wettest tropical forest is the one with the most incredible variety. Sometimes it seems that diversity is something you could get just by adding water. Not that simple, of course, but it is true that the diversity is the hardest to protect where the water's scarce. And diversity is pretty important when you think about it. Nobody would really pass up a good 5-course meal or just 5 helpings of just the garbanzos. And another drink of water really wouldn't help that much either.
Okay. Okay. First of all, I apologize for the difficulty, but I'm glad that you all got to see the video, and I'm glad that Stephanie is back with us, and you can hear us, Stephanie, right?
Good.
Yeah, please ask Stephanie your questions about the Álamos environment, okay? Pam?
Yeah, it seems that the water regime, the cycle of rain and aridity has changed in Álamos. If you could say something about that, that would be interesting. But also, it would seem that the changes in the cycles would have a large impact on the animals in the area. If you could say something about that.
Well, and that was one of the questions that people said that I was sort of asked if I would talk about the changes perhaps that have happened in the general forest around Álamos in the last 30 years. And there's no question that we've had some very long dry times, and the climate has changed greatly. What happened recently in the last year, when we had our very serious drought with only 4 inches of rain in 1 year of 2020, that is, it affected greatly the secondary growth. So if you look at the big picture and you look at what forest is left that is virgin, that forest seemed to be able to cope with these big changes, and the changes were much smaller. But the areas that are secondary growth, because of cutting it for cattle or crops, but most of the abuse here is for cattle, and that is where you really saw a lot of damage of just dying trees, thousands of dying trees. So the main thing is that cattle are a big problem. This forest isn't meant for grazing cattle, and it persists to be the biggest environmental problem at the moment. It never has been very well controlled. What else?
Okay. Other questions? Well,
Well, it's part
Stephanie,
of the problem. It's part of the problem with the cattle, the planting of bufo grass.
Right, in the 1980s, well, the bigger problem is that the market for cattle changed to a international market versus a national market in around 1985. And that's when the United States introduced the buffalo grass from Africa to, they said everywhere in the tropics, they were saying cut down the tropics for cattle. And hasn't changed much now. It's palm oil, it's oils. But between cattle and oils at the moment, devastation of tropical forests is huge in the world. And then they didn't consider with the buffalo grass the climate. And so the climate in Africa on the savannas is quite different than here. And so in around 1990, the government came out and said, whoops, that's enough conversion after they'd already converted 4 million hectares in the state of Sonora. And then that included the deserts up north, and of course the buffalo grass is now on its own crossed into the United States. Right. Bueno.
Stephanie, did I hear you?
Go ahead, Barbara.
Stephanie, did I hear you say that the U.S. government brought or was it the Mexican government?
No, it was the U.S. Soil Conservation Service.
And they brought it to Mexico?
Introduced it to Mexico, right. Yep, they came in and introduced it to the agricultural department of Mexico. And as I say, in the world at that time, they were just mowing down forests everywhere for cattle. And buffalo grass was the big answer. And we know now that it's been a tragedy. The biggest problem with buffalo grass is that it converts the desert, not here, but the desert, it converts it to a fire ecology. And the desert is not adapted to fire. So,
and it propagates through fire, right? So the more it burns, the more it spreads.
Right. And there aren't the trees in the desert there are here. The secondary trees come in here and immediately shade it out. We can get rid of it here. But up north, the trees aren't big enough, the palo verdes and the mesquites, and they don't shade it out. And it just continues as a grass and then creates fire.
Right.
In the film, the scientists talk a lot about the necessity of protecting the habitat for the fauna, for the animals. Now we did have this protected forest area in the municipality. What's happening with that?
Pretty much the same. In 1996, we started meetings in the late 80s about areas of protection and areas that were worth putting aside in the state of Sonora. And at that time, there was no land put aside for its natural resources. And now we have all the islands of the Sea of Cortez. We have 6 federal parks and then reserves. And so indeed, in 1996, here we declared 200,000 acres as protection for flora and fauna under the reserve system. So unfortunately, I can't say that a lot really happens with that, although it's worthwhile because people pay attention when the federal people do speak up. But we still have top of the mountain, and we can talk about that in the trip tomorrow, next week, and have good views of the Federal Reserve next week as we go down the road. And it encompasses all the land from here to Chihuahua. So it does have protection still, and it's still the same. And we have an office here.
What do you think about the diversity that they talked about? Has anybody been measuring whether that has been decreasing, or they talked about it in birds, snakes, whatever?
Right. No, Barbara, there just aren't. I mean, it's just interesting that the studies are just nil. People haven't looked at it in that way, and how much things have changed, and the government does no research whatsoever, and so other researchers have just quit coming here for various reasons, and one of them is that the federal park system isn't very friendly to researchers. And so a lot of people have just backed off. So there just aren't. The only study I can say that the only data that I can say but we didn't know what it was before, but we do know that the cats, the jaguars and mountain lions and the smaller ones are all in much better shape, very good shape. And than we imagined. And that's all from camera trapping. They have done a lot of camera trapping for wildlife, but we didn't know what it was before, you know. So
Could it be the cattle? Could they be getting at the cattle? I mean, I don't know, but that's food, right?
Yeah, they do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, are there lots of deer?
Deer has increased. Deer has increased.
One thing,
And do we have javelina?
Yes, javelina down here in the real foothills of the mountain, not high up, just in the foothills and on the more open areas. Yeah. And the Mexicans don't eat it. So javelina does fine. Yeah. Nobody hunts javelina. It's considered poor man's meat. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Right.
well, Stephanie, I was impressed with the video work. And I think, excuse me, you told me that some of that work was, the cats, the various, they were photographed at the Sonora Desert Museum. And the snakes and all, were they photographed here in Álamos?
Yeah, they were mostly here. Yeah, they were here in my yard. Yep. We had a whole bunch for that. You know, I was thinking about the movies I've done. I did location manager work for several films in the 90s and early 2000. And one of them was from the planet, what's it called? The planet, what is it? The planet, anyway, from England. And we've done a couple from England, but one was on the two beaded lizards, which there was nice shots of the beaded lizards and the Gila monsters. And we did a really nice, what was it called? The planet, it was on television all the time. Anyway, they were more pleased with, they came twice in different seasons and that was a really good National History video. So we've done several in addition to this one.
Okay. Well, are there other questions? We're about out of our time.
I have a request for Errol.
Oh, okay.
Can you post the video separate from the Zoom meeting so we can deal with it in our own environment?
Yeah, I don't know if I can, but I'll try that, Steve.
Yeah, because I'd like to show it to Donna on the TV, for instance, and it'd be easy.
There could be some copyright issues about posting that.
Yeah, but it could be that you could go online and stream it or something through PBS. I'll see what I can find out.
That'd be great.
On how you could access that video. We do have a copy in our research library. And, so that's, one aspect anyway, that people could go to the library anyway to see the video. Once we're set up, we're still working on that. Ellen is working hard. And, so that is one option. But I don't know about online, but I'll see what I can do anyway. Okay, are there
I have another question. I have a question for Stephanie. How is the beaded lizard doing? I was quite entranced by the beaded lizard.
How is it doing? What do you mean? The population of them?
Yeah.
No, they're really good. You can, in the summer, you can go out 6 o'clock in the evening and find one. No problem. I had one here in the yard this summer. Yeah.
Oh.
They're in good shape. Yeah.
So Stephanie, it sounds like the animals are doing okay. We're not sure about the diversity of birds, but when you think about the film, are there any negatives? Are there things that have changed for the worse over this past 30 years?
Well, I think so. I mean, I think the general health of the forest is worse. Oh, definitely. And it's due to climate more than, I mean, people and climate, you can say both. But no, I think that the quality of the forest is, yeah, you know, in the actual around Alamos, I mean, we had a huge inundation of the hurricane, made huge debris flows off the mountain and whatnot in 2008. But no, I think the world's climate in general is having a big impact. We can't handle the heat that we've got now. I mean, nothing's supposed to handle the heat we get. The heat we've had in the last couple of 3 years is just unbearable for everybody. And it's a big change, big change.
Yeah, I want to go back to Steve's question. If you go online to the Desert Speaks, you can probably find this video. It's episode 202, but if you go on to the Desert Speaks, so Steve, you might be able to share it with Donna this way, and you know, I'll just have to, you know, to try it. But anyway, I hope it's possible. Well, I want to thank all of you. I'm sorry I don't have a voice, but I want to thank all of you. And despite all the problems, we've had another successful meeting. And I've got the video, which I will, you know, post online. And I just thank all of you for sharing it. I'm going to be in isolation pretty much. For those of you that don't know, I've now got COVID, so I can't go anywhere. But anyway, we're working on that, and Dr. Stephanie will be taking care of me. And so I hope to be back. But next week, I will put in writing, we're going to have a field trip. You're going to take your own car, and all the details will be online. So I hope that many of you here in Álamos can take advantage of that. So I guess we'll sign off anyway.
Thanks, Errol.
Good to see you.
Hello.
Errol, thanks for
Thank
getting out of
you.
the
Thank
sick
you. Well,
and helping
goodbye,
us.
one and all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.